Ever wondered what college was like 800 years ago? Can you imagine studying without laptops, printed books, or even electricity? Number 10. The mind-blowing world of medieval student life. Picture this, you're a young man, yes, only men in the 13th century. You've traveled for weeks, maybe months, to reach one of Europe's emerging university towns like Paris, Oxford, or Bologna. Your parents have scraped together every coin they could to send you here. Why? Because education was the medieval elevator to success. Seriously, it was basically the only way to climb the social ladder if you weren't born into nobility. You arrive in a bustling town, crowded with other students from across Europe. Everyone's speaking Latin, the universal academic language, regardless of whether they're from England, France, Italy, or Germany. And here's the kicker, many students started university education around age 14. Imagine sending your teenager hundreds of miles away to study in a foreign town with virtually no supervision. What could possibly go wrong? The first surprise, no gorgeous campus with manicured lawns. Medieval universities didn't have dedicated buildings initially. Classes took place in rented rooms, churches, or even outdoors. Your dorm is a rented room in town, likely shared with several other students. No meal plans, no student unions, definitely no campus Starbucks. University life wasn't just about studying, it was about surviving. Students had to navigate town-gown tensions that occasionally erupted into actual armed conflicts between students and locals. In 1209, a dispute in Oxford escalated so badly that some scholars fled and established Cambridge University. Talk about a dramatic transfer. Number 9. The 7 liberal arts, your medieval core curriculum. Before you could dive into specialized fields like law, medicine, or theology, you needed to master the basics. The medieval foundation of education was the 7 liberal arts divided into 2 groups, the trivium and the quadrivium. The trivium came first, grammar, rhetoric, and logic. Grammar wasn't just about sentence structure, it was intensive Latin study. Students would spend years mastering classical Latin through texts by authors like Cicero and Virgil. They memorized massive amounts of material and learned to compose in proper Latin style. Rhetoric taught persuasive communication, essential for anyone planning a career in church or government. Logic trained students in formal reasoning and argument construction. After conquering the trivium, students moved to the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music. Surprised to see music in there. In medieval education, music wasn't just a performance art, it was a mathematical science studying proportions and harmonies. Astronomy was particularly fascinating. Students learned the Ptolemaic model of the universe, with Earth at the center and celestial bodies moving in perfect circles. They studied how to track planetary movements and calculate important dates on the religious calendar. This wasn't just theoretical knowledge, predicting Easter correctly was serious business. What's truly wild is that most teaching happened without books. Manuscripts were insanely expensive, a single book could cost as much as a house. Universities had chained libraries where precious texts were literally secured to shelves with chains. Most students couldn't afford their own books, so learning happened through listening, memorizing, and taking notes on wax tablets or scraps of parchment if they were lucky. Number 8. The shocking truth about teaching methods. Forget interactive workshops and engaging PowerPoint presentations. Medieval university teaching centered around 2 main formats, lectures and disputations. Lectures were exactly what the Latin word suggests, readings. A master would read from an authoritative text while adding commentary. Students frantically took notes, trying to capture both the original text and the professor's insights. Classes started at dawn and could go for hours without breaks. No coffee shops nearby either. The real intellectual excitement came from disputations, structured debates that were part academic exercise, part public entertainment. 2 students or masters would argue opposite sides of a question following strict logical rules. These weren't casual conversations but highly formalized verbal duels with specific formats for presenting arguments and objections. Questions could range from practical to seemingly absurd. Is it permissible to cook on the Sabbath? Or can an angel move from one point to another without passing through the space between? But these weren't just philosophical games, they taught students to think precisely and respond to counterarguments. The teaching relationship was intense. Masters didn't just instruct, they were responsible for their students' moral development and behavior. Students often lived in their master's house, creating an apprenticeship-like relationship. Your professor wasn't just someone you saw in class, he was potentially your landlord, mentor, and surrogate parent rolled into one. Number 7, Latin, the original universal language. Imagine attending classes where everyone speaks a language that's nobody's native tongue. That was the reality of medieval university education. Latin wasn't just a subject, it was the medium for all learning. From the moment a student entered the university gates, speaking anything but Latin could result in punishment. In some universities, informers called wolves would report students caught speaking their native language. The penalty, often a fine or public humiliation. This Latin immersion created a truly international academic community. A student could leave Oxford and continue his studies in Paris or Bologna without language barriers. Scholars from Ireland to Hungary could debate complex theological points using a shared academic vocabulary. The Latin used wasn't exactly Ciceronian. Medieval academic Latin developed its own specialized terminology to discuss philosophical and scientific concepts. Words like quiddity, the essential nature of something, or haexiety, the quality that makes something unique, were coined to express nuanced ideas. Latin wasn't just an academic tool, it was the key to social advancement. Mastering Latin meant access to careers in the church, law, medicine, and royal administration. It distinguished the educated from the uneducated more clearly than any diploma could today. The Latin-centered education created a paradoxical situation. Students became experts in ancient Roman texts while potentially knowing little about their own vernacular literature. Imagine being able to quote Virgil from memory, but never having read stories in your native language. Number 6, the surprising reality of student life and behavior. Think modern college parties get wild. Medieval student misbehavior was legendary. University records and town complaints reveal students engaging in everything from public drunkenness to armed robbery. In 1298, Oxford authorities complained about an intolerable multitude of malefactors among the student population. Students carried weapons routinely, despite numerous prohibitions. Fights between student nations, groups organized by geographical origin, could escalate into mini-wars. The famous Battle of St. Scholastica's Day in 1355 began with a tavern dispute about beer quality and ended with dozens dead and parts of Oxford in flames. Speaking of taverns, they were centers of student social life. Universities regularly issued regulations limiting drinking hours and prohibited gambling, which suggests these activities were widespread problems. Records show students pawning their books and even their clothes to fund their entertainment. Not all students were troublemakers, of course. Many were serious scholars who genuinely dedicated themselves to learning. But the stereotype of the rowdy, privileged student has very deep historical roots. Student poverty was also a real issue. While wealthy students lived comfortably with personal servants, many others struggled to afford food and lodging. Some resorted to begging, while others worked as copyists or tutors to support themselves. Universities developed systems of financial aid, including scholarships and loans, to help poorer students. Living arrangements varied widely. Some students resided in colleges, which originally were just endowed residences, not educational institutions themselves. Others rented rooms from townspeople or lived in residence halls under varying levels of supervision. The poorest might sleep several to a room on straw mats. Number 5, medicine, bloodletting, astrology, and dissection. Medieval medical education offers some of the most fascinating insights into how people understood the world. Medical students first studied the same liberal arts as everyone else before specializing. Their medical training was heavily theoretical, based on ancient authorities like Hippocrates and Galen. The human body was understood according to the theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health meant these humors were in balance, disease meant they weren't. Treatment often involved restoring balance through diet, lifestyle changes, or direct interventions like bloodletting. Contrary to popular belief, medieval medicine wasn't completely unscientific. It was based on careful observation within a theoretical framework that made sense given the available evidence. Medical students learned to track symptoms, examine bodily fluids, and take pulses. Astrology was considered a legitimate part of medical education. The positions of planets could affect health because everything in the universe was interconnected. Medical students learned to cast horoscopes to determine the best time for treatments or to understand disease causes. The most prestigious medical schools, like those at Montpellier and Salerno, eventually included practical training. Students would observe masters treating patients and gradually take on responsibilities themselves. At some universities, public dissections were performed once or twice yearly, with students crowd around to see human anatomy firsthand, a rare opportunity in an era when dissection was generally taboo. Pharmacy was an integral part of medical education. Students learned to identify medicinal plants and prepare compounds. Many herbal remedies they studied have been validated by modern science as having genuine medicinal properties. By graduation, medical students had to defend public theses and undergo practical examinations. The resulting degree allowed them to practice legally, though many healers worked without formal qualifications. Number 4. Law: the path to power and prosperity. If medieval universities had career placement officers, they would have steered ambitious students toward law. Legal education, particularly in civil Roman law, was the fastest route to lucrative employment. Bologna became the premier destination for legal studies. There, students studied Justinian's 6th century compilation of Roman law, the Corpus Juris Civilis. The revival of Roman law was revolutionary in providing systematic legal principles for societies that had relied on custom and local practice. Canon law, the law of the church, formed another major branch of legal study. With the church involved in everything from marriage to property disputes, experts in canon law were in high demand. Law students spent years memorizing texts and learning to apply legal principles to hypothetical cases. They participated in mock trials and learned to draft legal documents. The emphasis was on practical skills as well as theoretical knowledge. What's fascinating is how student-driven legal education was at Bologna. Students collectively hired professors, set curriculum requirements, and could find instructors who skipped classes or finished lectures early. Talk about consumer power in education. Legal training created a professional class that transformed medieval governance. Trained lawyers staffed royal courts and administrative offices, gradually replacing the nobility in government functions. Their expertise in Roman law strengthened monarchies by providing legal justifications for centralized authority. Law students typically came from wealthier backgrounds than other students. Their investment paid off. A successful legal career could bring enormous wealth and influence. Some law professors became so famous that students traveled from across Europe just to study with them. Number 3. Theology, the supreme science. At the pinnacle of medieval education stood theology, considered the queen of the sciences. After years of preliminary study in arts and philosophy, only the most dedicated scholars proceeded to theology. The road was incredibly long. At the University of Paris, becoming a master of theology typically required 16 years of study after the arts degree. That's longer than becoming a neurosurgeon today. Theological education centered on biblical exegesis, interpretation, and study of the church fathers like Augustine and Jerome. Students analyzed scripture on 4 levels: literal, allegorical, moral, and anagogical, relating to spiritual enlightenment. Peter Lombard's Sentences, a compilation of theological questions and authoritative answers, became the standard textbook. Students spent years commenting on this text, demonstrating their mastery through increasingly sophisticated interpretations. The development of scholasticism, a method emphasizing logical analysis and systematic categorization, transformed theological education. Thomas Aquinas exemplified this approach in his Summa Theologica, which attempted to reconcile faith with Aristotelian philosophy. Unlike other fields, theology had direct practical applications in preaching and spiritual guidance. Advanced students were required to preach regularly, putting their learning into practice. Theological education wasn't just about mastering content, it was about personal transformation. Students were expected to embody the virtues they studied. Their intellectual work was considered a form of devotion, a way of understanding God's creation. Number 2, the revolutionary impact of Aristotle. One of the most dramatic developments in medieval education was the reintroduction of Aristotle's works to Western Europe in the 12th and 13th centuries. These texts arrived via Arabic translations and commentaries, creating an intellectual earthquake. Aristotle's comprehensive system of natural philosophy covered physics, biology, ethics, politics, and metaphysics. His logical works provided tools for analyzing arguments. His ethical writings offered a framework for thinking about human flourishing without direct reference to Christian revelation. Universities initially responded with suspicion. In 1210, the University of Paris banned teaching Aristotle's natural philosophy. But the intellectual appeal was too strong to resist. By mid-century, Aristotle's works had become fundamental to the curriculum. The challenge was reconciling Aristotelian philosophy with Christian doctrine. Aristotle taught that the world was eternal rather than created, and his theory of the soul raised questions about individual immortality. Scholars like Thomas Aquinas devoted themselves to harmonizing these traditions, creating sophisticated philosophical systems. Students encountering Aristotle were exposed to a rational, systematic approach to understanding the natural world. They learned that observation and reason could reveal truths about nature, a perspective that would eventually contribute to the development of modern science. Aristotle's influence extended far beyond natural philosophy. His politics and ethics shaped how students understood human society and moral development. His rhetoric and poetics influenced the study of communication and literature. The Aristotelian revolution wasn't just about content, it was about method. Students learned to approach questions systematically, distinguish between different types of causes, and recognize the importance of empirical observation alongside abstract reasoning. Number 1, the astonishing journey from medieval to modern education. The medieval university seems wildly different from modern higher education, yet it established patterns that persist today. Academic degrees, faculty structures, even graduation ceremonies all have medieval origins. What's most surprising is how intellectually ambitious medieval education was. At its best, it aimed to integrate all knowledge into a coherent worldview. Students weren't just learning discrete subjects, they were developing a comprehensive understanding of reality itself. The curriculum evolved significantly over the medieval period. By the 15th century, humanist influences brought increased attention to classical literature and rhetoric. Greek, largely unknown in earlier medieval education, returned as an important subject. Mathematics received greater emphasis. Universities gradually shifted from being purely student guilds or faculty corporations to becoming institutions tied to political powers. This brought greater stability but reduced the remarkable student autonomy that had characterized early universities like Bologna. The invention of the printing press in the mid-15th century transformed education. Suddenly, books became more affordable and accessible. Students could own personal copies of texts rather than relying solely on memorization or borrowed manuscripts. Tensions between faith and reason, authority and innovation, theory and practice, themes that dominated medieval education, continue to shape educational debates today. Even the structure of academic arguments still follows patterns developed in medieval disputations. Perhaps most importantly, medieval universities established the idea that learning is a communal enterprise. Knowledge wasn't just transmitted from master to student, but developed through debate and collective inquiry. Despite the hierarchical structure, there was a fundamental belief that truth emerges through dialogue. As we navigate our own educational revolutions with digital learning, interdisciplinary approaches, and ongoing debates about the purpose of higher education, we're participating in conversations that began in those drafty rented rooms where medieval students gathered to hear masters read ancient texts by candlelight. Did medieval students ever imagine their educational institutions would evolve into the massive universities we know today? What would a time-traveling scholar from medieval Paris make of modern college life?